harnessing today's screaming demons of speed and measuring their victories and defeats in fractions of a blink. They will go to faraway places and hold their races just as their fathers and grandfathers have done before them. And winning isn't everything, it's the only thing, even if no one's watching. And on the way home, under the skin, the machine's still with us, still there, still keeping us safe. In this program, we see what kind of wheels have been moving the world's millions over the last century or so. Rich people rode, poor people walked. Horses, carriages, bicycles and cars. That's the way it was. Since the earliest days, motoring has never been exactly cheap. At first, it was only the wealthy and the brave who could afford to dispense with their horse-drawn carriages and take up with the infernal combustion engine. But transport continued to be defined by money. The wealthy rode or flew, the poor walked or pedalled. Then Henry Ford changed the way the world moved and worked. He drove the first Ford car in 1896 and the first Model T in 1908. Originally, the Tin Lizzy cost $850, but 8 years later, with efficiencies in production, the price had dropped to $360. By 1918, over half the cars in America were Model T's, and when production stopped in 1927, over 15 million had been built, a record that stood for over 45 years. 100 years after the first Model T was built, enthusiasts gathered in Britain to celebrate the model's centenary.
My father, when he was quite a young man, was a chauffeur up in London, and he drove Model T's. And he worked for a boiler company, and the governor used to come in the morning and say, right, today we're going to Scotland. And he used to drive to Scotland. He had a new Model T nearly every year because they used to wear them out. They did so many mileage in them.
Ford also changed forever the way people worked in factories. He employed the best mechanics, became the father of the moving production line, doubled minimum wages, and drove down the cost of entry into motor car ownership. Some of his factories employed tens of thousands of semi-skilled workers. In 1914, Ford doubled the wages of his workers and doubled his profits. The next year, he dropped the price of the Model T by 2/3 and sold 1 million cars. Ford opened factories around the world, and the Model T was built in 32 countries.
This is a nice example. This is a 1914 Model T, one of the first to be built in Trafford Park in Manchester. And in the early days, they came across in crates of bits. And one of the ways that Henry Ford was able to make the cars just that bit cheaper is he insisted that the workers cut the crates up and use the wood for floorboards for the car, saving a few extra pennies.
By 1932, Ford was manufacturing a third of all the world's automobiles. But it was the Model T that made motoring accessible to the masses, famously available in any colour you like, so long as it's black. Europe wasn't lagging behind America, although none of the car makers there managed to rival Ford's remarkable influence on mainstream American culture. Louis Renault was the youngest of 5 children in a wealthy French family. After his army service, he built a 4-wheeled small car equipped with one of his inventions, a 3-speed gearbox with reverse. This first little car, the Renault Type A, made Louis Renault a manufacturer. He won a bet with friends that it would drive up a steep street, and he received 12 orders for the car. In 1905, Renault became a mass producer with an order of 250 taxicabs. In 2 years, there were more than 1,500 Renault taxis on the streets of Paris, and more were exported to London, New York, and Buenos Aires. contrast, Citroen came along much later, 1919. But founder André Citroen had previously made gears and hand grenades during World War I. He was greatly influenced by Henry Ford's production methods, and in 1934, Citroens were among the first front-wheel drive cars.
The 1948 model was not much praised by the specialised press. They said, "What kind of a car is this? It's grey. It's really weird." It's true that it was sort of a UFO in the car industry at the time.
It was at the Paris Motor Show in 1948 that Citroën first introduced their low-cost car. For almost half a century, the 2CV revolutionised the French car industry. It became a major part of the country's culture and way of life. The first 2CV was created in 1939, right before the Second World War. It only made its public debut in Paris. It was the oddest car ever presented at the show. It had only one headlight, no starter motor, and very loose suspension, which made it jump on bumps. It looked more like a tin can than a car. The 2CV was very cheap, designed for the countryside. Originally, it was made to replace a farmer's horse and cart. This meant the car was solid, almost indestructible, able to transport 4 people and a crate of eggs across a freshly ploughed field without breaking the eggs. Its cheapness and practicality appealed to low-income families who could finally afford to buy a car, so the public responded well. And very soon, 2 years after its introduction, there was a waiting list of 2 years to get one. Altogether, more than 5 million 2CVs were produced, but in 1989, production stopped in France. 1 year later, in July 1990, the only remaining production line in Portugal also stopped. Over in Germany, where the very first car was built by Carl Benz in 1885, another Beetle's car was to rise from the ashes of the Second World War, the Volkswagen. Kindly called the Beetle because of its shape, the name stuck, and the rear-engined car became an icon for a generation. It was designed by an engineer whose next project would make his name revered by enthusiasts around the world, Dr. Ferdinand Porsche. His sports cars would dominate racing and define luxury high-performance driving for decades. During the 1960s and early 1970s, Volkswagen advertising campaigns and a reputation for reliability and sturdiness helped Beetle sales figures rocket up. In 1972, production passed the level of the previous record holder, the Ford Model T. And by 1992, over 21 million Beetles had been produced. Beetles were built in Ireland, Thailand, Indonesia, South Africa, Australia and Nigeria, as well as huge numbers in Mexico and Brazil. In 1962, a slightly modified Beetle set a new record for driving round Australia. The Beetle is popular with customizers around the world, not only because it's cheap and easy to work on, but because the body can be personalized or even removed entirely to make sun-loving beach buggies and off-road racers. A whole generation, thousands of racing drivers started their quest to reach Formula One in single-seater Formula V races, using Beetle engines, wheels, brakes and suspension. Another German manufacturer that was resurrected from the ruins of World War II was NSU, who built motorcycles and scooters and made the natural progression to small, lightweight cars. The Prince was built in large numbers between 1957 and 1973. The early cars were noisy and slow, but improvements were made throughout the Prince's 16-year life cycle. There were over 20,000 sport Princes built, a pretty little coupe, and even some convertibles, which were the first cars in the world to use a rotary engine. But in 1969, Volkswagen bought NSU, and the Prince, being a competitor to the Beetle, was doomed. Behind the Iron Curtain, would-be car owners were not given anything like the choice of their Western cousins. East Germany built and sold over 3 million Trabants, which didn't change much in the almost 30 years it was in production. Starting with the unlovely T70, claimed to be the world's first production car with a plastic body, and then with the more shapely Trabant, East German motorists had little choice. At about the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, a Trabant cost 2 years' pay. The waiting list for delivery of a new one was reported to be 11 years, with no choice of colour or body style. The options included 4 basic colours, either 2-door sedan or 3-door station wagon, and a trailer for a small caravan. Powered by a smoky, small but quite powerful 2-stroke engine, the Trabi became a symbol of the failure of communism and were often found abandoned after the collapse of the East German regime. Unloved and now unwanted, their peculiar fiberboard Duraplast bodies were impossible to recycle, and Trabis became an environmental nightmare. Volkswagen took over the antiquated production plant in an effort to save the jobs of thousands of workers. The basic Trabi body was reworked to take a modern engine from the VW Polo, but such was the public's disdain for the car's shape that only a handful were ever sold. Predictably, within 15 years, Trabis, especially older ones, became rare, collectible and valuable.
Well, the understanding we have of the Japanese, I don't remember, I think it's 35 or 40 years old. It was a bilateral agreement on contingents, us towards Japan and Japan towards us. The real reason was that they feared at that moment, where the motor car industry was inexistent, they feared the competition from the small Italian cars. The contingent is tiny, but at the moment they are exporting in Italy already 40 or 50,000 cars in sort of, let's say, rover-like special niches of cars. I believe that that agreement will surely finish. I don't think that their push in Italy would get them much further than 3 or 4% anyway.
In Italy, Fiat was formed in July 1899. Giovanni Agnelli was determined that Fiat would be highly successful and became managing director of Fiat in 1902. In 1900, the first Fiat factory opened with a workforce of 150 people who built just 24 cars that first year. In the early days, Agnelli also represented the company on the racetrack, driving an 8-horsepower Fiat in the second Italian car tour to set a record in that race. In 1908, Fiat opened up in the United States. The company grew in leaps and bounds, and the Fiat was a luxury item in America, costing much more than the average domestic car of the period, which was usually a Ford. Fiat continued to grow at a swift rate. It wasn't long before the company expanded its product line with trucks, trams and marine engines. During the Mussolini years, Fiat had to scale down its international presence and concentrate on the domestic market. In the 30s, trucks and commercial vehicles underwent technical development, and the aviation and railway sectors grew. Italian engineers learnt from wherever they could, and the new sprawling Mirafiore factory was mass-producing cars in 1939, but the war cut car production to a trickle. A decade later, car production at the war-ravaged factories picked up again. Over the years, facilities at Mirafiore have been constantly updated, and robots now do much of the work. The Topolino, or Little Mouse, was one of the smallest cars in the world at the time of its production in 1937. Topolino was also the name given to Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse when the cartoon was translated into Italian. Just 3 models were produced until 1955. A small small car was planned by Fiat as early as 1919, but although catalogues were produced, the car never appeared. In 1934, the now Senator Agnelli visualized a small, mass-produced Beetle's car, selling for 5,000 lira, capable of carrying 2 people comfortably with 50 kilos of luggage. The task was put in the hands of 29-year-old aeronautical engineer Dante Giacosa. Eventually, over 500,000 Topolinos were built, including several hundred four-seaters, which were made in England. More than 20 years on, the same designer, Dante Giacosa, was tasked with reinventing his earlier creation. The Fiat 500 replaced the little mouse and was produced from 1957 until 1975, with limited production of the station wagon continuing until 1977. Also known as the Bambino, the 500 was a cheap and practical town car, measuring only 3 meters long and originally powered by a tiny 500cc two-cylinder air-cooled engine. The 500 redefined the small car and is considered to be one of the first true city cars. Millions were built as Italy rebuilt after the devastation of World War II. 50 years on, the tiny Italian has become a cult classic, with enthusiasts around the world paying big money to own an original example. Other small Fiats followed. The giant Italian carmaker became expert at making cars that would fit down streets that were built hundreds of years before the first motor car. Fiat also allowed its designs to be built elsewhere once Western European tastes had moved on. Many Ladas built for years in Soviet Russia used Fiat designs, even old tooling from Italian factories. Not surprisingly, perhaps, the idea of a small car still has appeal, so Fiat relaunched the 500 in the 21st century. Looking much like its predecessor, the new 500 was no longer powered by a small 500cc engine, but was a thoroughly modern little car with up-to-date clean petrol and diesel engines, safety and convenience.
I think it's going to provide a significant contribution to the re-establishment of the brand, especially in Europe. It's a car that represents a lot of the history of this group. I think it represents the best of our technological output today. It's at quality levels which are in excess of Japanese standards. And so I think it reflects the best of what this group is, and I think that we're very, very hopeful that it's going to have a significant success in both in terms of commercial sales, in terms of the positioning of the brand itself.
Until his death in 2003, Gianni Agnelli, grandson of Fiat's founding chairman, was also head of the company, now a huge multinational corporation with many interests outside the car industry. Under Agnelli Jr.'s control, Fiat took over other Italian motoring icons such as Lancia, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, and the greatest prize of all, Ferrari, complete with its Formula One racing team.
But irrespective of his title, he was really a political force, and probably one of the strongest political forces in the country. Although you wouldn't consider the General Motors chairman in Detroit to be the person who can choose governments or impact on foreign policy, Agnelli did that in Italy. And Agnelli had a kind of unholy alliance with political parties. He basically supported anybody who was in power in order to get government money for Fiat projects.
Over in England at the beginning of the 20th century, the popularity of the motor car was also blossoming. Cars became so popular so fast that new laws had to be rushed in to address the new problem of safety on the road. These included the employment of men carrying red flags to walk ahead of cars to warn other road users that a car was coming. Happily, this didn't last too long. Britain's version of Henry Ford was William Morris, a bicycle mechanic. He briefly made motorbikes, then cars. The outbreak of World War I interrupted car production, and his factories were turned over to making war munitions. but by 1925 he was building 56,000 cars a year, employing Ford's mass production techniques. Soon, the former son of a farm labourer was buying up his rivals. Morris was made a baron in 1934 and became Viscount Nuffield in 1938. His marriage was childless and the peerage expired when he died in 1963. At the time of his death, his philanthropic bequests amounted to over £30 million, the largest part of which was given to research in medicine and social services, notably Oxford, where Nuffield College is named in his. The increasing demand for sporting motor cars was answered in 1924, and MG, which stood for Morris Garage, cars were a cornerstone of affordable motoring for enthusiastic drivers for over 60 years. From their earliest days, MGs were used in competition, and a series of experimental cars were made, allowing Captain George Easton to take several world speed records. After World War II, record attempts restarted in the 1940s. A decision was taken to return to racing, and a team of MGAs was entered for the tragic 1955 Le Mans 24-hour race. Herbert Austin was Morris's biggest rival. After spending 10 years in Australia, where he designed a new sheep shearing machine, Austin started building small cars in 1905. 3 years later, Austin was making 17 different models. The company was almost bankrupt in 1921, but the baby Austin was launched in 1922 for sale at £225, putting it within reach of Britons who had never previously owned a car. Output reached 25,000 annually by 1925, and the price was reduced each year. Global tough times in the 1930s hit Britain and many workers lost their jobs, but the bigger factories weathered the storms of peacetime. The storm of war was another story. All British industrial capacity was allocated to military purposes during World War II. Austin made ambulances, aircraft, guns, and even jerry cans for the war effort. Leonard Lord worked for Morris, but after years of conflict with his boss, he resigned to join rival Austin just before the war began. Much later, he became chairman and was knighted. After years of mergers in the faltering British motor industry, he headed up the blighted British Motor Corporation. Condemned for poor vision and leadership, Sir Leonard did persuade Alec Isigonis to rejoin BMC to create what became the Mini, famously analysed by Ford, who concluded that BMC must have been losing £30 on every one sold. The Mini was produced from 1959 until 2000. Its space-saving front-wheel drive layout allowed 80% of the car to be used for passengers and luggage. It was the British answer to Fiat's 500, Volkswagen's Beetle and Citroen's 2CV. Times during its life, it was built at plants in England, Australia, Spain, Chile, Italy, South Africa, Venezuela and even Yugoslavia. In 1999, the Mini was voted the second most influential car of the 20th century, behind the Ford Model T. But by the end of the 20th century, even the mighty Mini couldn't support Rover, the company which was building it. Thanks to an aggressive CEO, Bernd Pischetsrieder, BMW took control of Rover and sent the 40-year-old small car into the history books, but was already working on a successor, bigger, with modern manners, engineering and safety standards. Development of the first new Mini had been done between 1995 and 2001 by Rover in the UK and by BMW in Germany. When BMW reversed the purchase and sold off its interest in Rover in 2000, the German company decided to keep the Mini project and to build the car themselves. And in a curious quirk, original Mini designer Sir Alec Isigonis was the first cousin once removed of Bernd Pischetsrieder, the man who ordered the death of the original Mini and the creation of its replacement. New Mini is sold as a high-performance, safety-conscious car in various forms. cabrio, wagon and saloon for the young and young at heart. Benefiting very much from German engineering designs and with engines coming from plants in other countries for cost effectiveness, New Mini manages to remain very much a British creation. Detractors suggest that, unlike the new Beetle and the new 500, New Mini is very much bigger than the original, but offers no more space. Of course, it does offer much higher safety levels, and, in some versions at least, very much more performance. What hasn't changed is the fun factor. Perhaps one reason why, in the remake of the movie The Italian Job, new Minis were used by daring robbers, just as the original Mini had starred in the first movie. When Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu decided in the mid-1960s that he wanted to have a car industry, he chose the head of Romanian industrial espionage to start the project rolling. He knew nothing about manufacturing cars, but neither did anyone else among Ceausescu's top men. But his father had spent most of his life running the service department of the General Motors garage in Bucharest. Ceausescu ordered him to mediate the purchase of a minimum basic license for a small car from a major Western manufacturer, and then to steal everything else he needed. Of three Western companies, Ceausescu decided on Renault because it was owned by the French government. Soviet bloc rulers tended to distrust private companies. He ended up with a license for the antiquated and about to be discontinued Renault 12 because it was the cheapest. Ceausescu baptized the car Dacia, and unnecessary luxuries like the radio and heating were eliminated by the bureaucrats and workers' union that was running the factory. Perfect for the idiots, Ceausescu approved. Indeed, the Romanian people, who had never before had any car, came to cherish the Dacia. Amazingly, the Dacia name continues, still building Renaults under license. But now the quality is improved, and low labour costs mean that there's even a small export market for the Logan model. And it now has both a radio and a heater too.
C'est un véhicule en motorisation
This vehicle has a modern 1.4 to 1.6 litre
C'est un
engine.
véhicule qui est très bien équipé
It's
au
a very
regard, là
well-equipped
encore,
car
de la
compared to the
concurrence dans ces
competition.
prix-là. Et puis surtout, c'est
It's
un véhicule
also a
qui a
car
une
with
très
a
grande
great
habitabilité
capacity
puisque ses
compared to the
concurrentes
capacity of the
sont
competition.
plutôt des marques
Mostly cars
peut-être
from Korea.
coréennes par exemple, mais dans des types de
And,
véhicules et des
above all,
habitabilités
for the
bien moindres.
price, this
Et puis
vehicle is
enfin
very
et surtout,
safe.
c'est un véhicule
For
qui, à ce
example, it has
prix-là,
the anti-lock
a
braking system,
tous les
or
niveaux de
ABS.
sécurité tels
And that's
que
essential
l'ABS
for
par exemple,
French
qui est quelque chose de
clientele.
très important pour la clientèle française. Renault destine
Renault
ce
aims this
véhicule à
vehicle
l'Europe
at Western
occidentale et
Europe,
puis
and recently
depuis peu
we've
a
decided
été
to launch
décidé
it
de
in
la lancer
Brazil
aussi
and
au
in
Brésil
India,
et en
which
Inde,
means that the
ce qui
forecast
porte
for
à l'horizon
2010
2010
is more
un
like
nombre
1
non pas de
million
700 000
vehicles
véhicules
rather
comme
than
c'était prévu
700,000.
initialement, mais plutôt 1 million de véhicules et l'Inde va
With the
permettre
right side driving in
d'avoir entre
India,
autres une
it will
conduite à
open
droite,
up new
ce qui ouvre
prospects
là
for
encore de
Logan.
nouveaux horizons pour Logan.
The Logan falls well below performance and safety levels that Western European car buyers expect. In spite of widely missing the €5,000 target, the €7,500 price in Western Europe still makes the Logan an extremely affordable mid-sized car, thousands of euro cheaper than the Nissan Tino or Seat Cordoba. Logan was intended mainly for Eastern European countries, including Romania, Hungary and the Czech Republic.
This is perfect. Imagine, this is an old engine. It's hard, but we do find the parts and we get it running. For example, this carburetor here is from a Nissan B12 with a racing purifier, which is pretty modern and works for me. You can see how it runs. It runs smoothly and with no problems. The radiator is from a Mitsubishi, the alternator is from a Toyota, and the brakes are also Toyota. Well, it's all made up, but they work fine. What else can I say? The sacrifice made by people who have these cars, I believe, is beyond measure. It's something extraordinary. When you see one of these cars on the road, you have to imagine, after 50 years, how does it run? They run with these parts here. This is a 1939 Ford body. We've already exchanged the chassis and the mechanics. We're now mounting the steering mechanism, which is a graft from several different cars. The servo is Toyota, the brakes are Toyota, and the suspension is Chevrolet. I want it to ride like a modern car, even though it's a car from 1939. I love these cars, and it's a challenge for me to get them to run like a modern car, even when they aren't.
Things that surprises foreign visitors to Cuba is the impressive number of old classic cars on the streets. More surprising is the fact that they're not part of a classic car parade or collector cars from a museum. Quite the contrary, they're regular vehicles in daily use for pleasure and for work. Almost all of Cuba's classic cars are from the United States, and that's part of the reason they still exist today. When Fidel Castro took control of the island in 1959, the United States government soon imposed a blockade and embargo on Cuba, hoping it would weaken Castro's appeal and lead to his overthrow. Instead, it led to extreme shortages, which caused Cubans to become very inventive and make do with what they had. Made buying new cars an impossibility, and nowadays visitors are amazed that they can see classic American cars built over half a century ago during Detroit's legendary years in daily use. What no one knew back in the 50s was that Cuba would be invaded by these vehicles forever. Some rare jewels from the early days of the past century are still circulating, while their owners have become true magicians in order to keep them rolling. Mechanics perform miracles, and body repairmen have become specialists with a hammer and elbow grease. Most of the owners use their cars as taxis, both legally and otherwise, and charge 10 Cuban pesos, or about 30 US cents per trip. This has forced many of them to change over from their original gas-guzzling engines to less consuming diesel engines to make a profit. Adapting the American cars to accept Soviet or maritime diesel engines is an art in itself. Cuba is internationally recognized as a museum on wheels. It's the country with the most antique and classic cars in use today. Throughout Cuba, you can find all sorts of classic cars in excellent condition, and their value has an emotional aspect attached, since many of these vehicles have been in the same family for decades. These cars are the only true property many Cubans own, and those that were in private hands before 1959 are the only vehicles that can change hands freely among the population. Cars made after 1959 are not allowed to be bought or sold by the general public, making the ownership of a classic car very valuable. Foreigners cannot own one, let alone take one out of the country. A few years back, Fidel Castro made these classic cars part of the natural patrimony, and therefore they're considered treasures that can never leave the island.
It will work through rain and bad weather, and hopefully we can give the younger people of India who have not had a car within their reach an automobile that they can have for their families and transport their families through both weather and slippery roads with greater safety.
Tata Motors, India's top vehicle maker, has also joined the ranks of vehicle exporters with the Nano small car. Ratan Tata, chairman of India's biggest car maker by sales, announced a sales price of just $2,500 US plus VAT plus transportation. Dubbed the people's car, the Nano has a 624cc petrol engine and meets all safety and emissions norms. The Nano is another step in Tata Motors' decade-old car manufacturing history that began with the introduction of the Indica hatchback. Tata has sold more than 1 million cars based on the Indica platform, including the Indigo sedan and the Indigo Marina station wagon. Tata is also the owner of the historic and prestigious British car maker Jaguar. Long before its unveiling, the small car project had already received accolades from motorcycle owners who wanted to upgrade to an affordable car. But it drew criticism from environmental groups who said that it would add to the already crowded roads of India. Tata's small car has already prompted other automakers to follow suit. Bajaj Auto plans to manufacture a small car with Nissan and Renault that will be introduced in 2 to 4 years. Suzuki, which controls half of India's car market, sold the Maruti 800, then the cheapest car in India that cost nearly double Tata's new small car. In India, where small is beautiful, hatchbacks or cars with engine capacities ranging from 800 to 1600cc traditionally made up about 3/4 of the more than 1 million cars sold each year in the country, Asia's third biggest automobile market. The dominance of small cars in India has led General Motors, Ford and other global automakers to introduce small cars into India or announce plans to enter this segment in a market where annual sales are forecast to grow 3 million units by 2015. The other vast untapped market for car manufacturers, China, is proving harder to crack than India, but is potentially much more lucrative.
It's a key strategic market for Ford Motor Company, and you only have to look at the size of the industry. You know, this year is tracking towards a 10 million unit industry. It's a key market for us, and we're very intent to do well in this market.
Many Western companies have joint ventures to supply designs, technology and complex components like engines and gearboxes to homegrown Chinese car makers like Geely. Geely, whose name means good luck, made a showing at a European car show for the first time just a few years ago, serving global manufacturers notice that the Chinese, with their cheap labour costs and low prices, are coming to their markets too. Geely started in 1986 making refrigerators. By 1992, motorcycle parts. In 1994, Geely began manufacturing complete motorcycles. By 1996, Geely had produced over 200,000 bikes and scooters, and automobile production started in 1998. Geely began exporting its first cars in 2003. In 2006, Geely also became the first Chinese car maker to display at the Detroit Motor Show. The company originally planned to begin selling cars for the North American market in 2008, the year of the Beijing Olympics. After several test vehicles failed US crash and emissions tests, Geely's debut in America was delayed. In Peru, Uruguay and Venezuela, Geely is already selling cars and motorbikes and entered the Romanian, Pakistani, South African and Bangladeshi car markets, but left the South African market after failing to make any inroads. The undisputed giant of the car world is Toyota, just one of Japan's many car manufacturers. Toyota beat off the American Big Three, General Motors, Ford and Chrysler, to be the world's top-selling car maker. And of all the many models made by the huge multinational company, it is the humble Corolla, which is also the best-selling car of all time. More than 35 million Corollas have been sold since the first one was built in 1966. That's roughly one car every 40 seconds. Purists will point out that unlike the Volkswagen Beetle and Ford's Model T before it, the Corolla has undergone massive changes across 10 different generations. And the current Corollas bear no similarity to the very first, whereas Beetles and Model Ts were largely unchanged. No matter, the Corolla has been the first or only car for many millions of people around the world. Besides the sprawling factory in Japan, Corollas are also built in Brazil, Canada, China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, South Africa, Thailand and the UK. And they were also built at one time in Australia and the US. Like many small cars, the Corolla has grown over the years. Originally a humble 1100cc people's car, it's become bigger, and now smaller Toyotas are made to take its place. But it's unlikely any of them will ever match its massive sales figures. All car manufacturers are studying the future of personal transport, particularly with a view to the constraints of the megacities of the future. Nissan's Pivo hopes to make parking especially easy, or their Land Glider electric vehicle, while Toyota thinks the future will be the even smaller, single-occupant vehicle like the iReal. The iReal is really like a high-tech wheelchair with a couple of modes of operation. Upright, where it runs at walking speed, or with the wheelbase extended and the passenger tilted back, where it will achieve about 35 kilometers an hour. And looking further into the future? Tomorrow's fantasy is often today's fact. But two engineering challenges are most commonly discussed. One is boosting safety with the ultimate goal of removing the human element from the control of vehicles. And the other is improving environmental efficiency by finding sources of energy that don't depend on fossil fuels.
The technology is based on radar technology and laser technology sensors that literally give you a 360-degree look around the vehicle at everything and quite a bit of precision. And then intelligence on the vehicle that can interpret what the car is seeing and decide what to do. When you're stuck in traffic or you're busy or you would like to check your email or read a newspaper or eat or talk on the cell phone, geez, maybe you'd like to have somebody take over the controls. Well, that's the path that we're on.
Pretty small little vehicle. It's about as wide as this bike lane right next to us.
General Motors and Segway together developed a two-wheeled, two-seat prototype electric vehicle designed to be a fast, safe, inexpensive and clean alternative to traditional cars and trucks for cities around the world.
The story that we find so fascinating and also I think so important for urban dwellers is the ability to get to their destination faster, the ability to not worry about parking the vehicle, and importantly, you know, if you are used to the daily grind of your commute and you'd rather be doing something else, you can allow the vehicle to drive itself and you can take advantage of that time.
In reality, the Personal Urban Mobility and Accessibility, or PUMA project, would involve a vast communications network that would allow vehicles to interact with each other, regulate the flow of traffic, and prevent crashes from ever happening. The 140-kilogram prototype runs on a lithium-ion battery and uses Segway's clever two-wheel balancing technology along with dual electric motors. It's designed to reach speeds of up to 60 kilometers an hour and can travel 60 kilometers on a single charge.
Energy efficiency is fashionable and reducing your environmental footprint is fashionable, and I also think it's fashionable to be polite to other people when you're driving. This whole thing of road rage is unfortunate. These are polite machines. They're quiet, they're clean.
The companies wouldn't reveal the projected cost for the vehicle, but said ideally its total operating cost, including purchase price, insurance, maintenance and fuel, would total between 1/4 and 1/3 of that of the average traditional vehicle. Ideally, the vehicles would also be part of a communications network that, through the use of transponder and GPS technology, would allow them to drive themselves. The vehicles would automatically avoid obstacles such as pedestrians and other cars, and therefore never crash. As a result, the Puma vehicles wouldn't need airbags or other safety devices, and would include safety belts for comfort purposes only. Though the technology and its goals may seem like something out of science fiction, in fact, nothing new needs to be invented for it to become a reality. But while other clever devices like the Segway may have come and gone, they might come back as lovingly restored classics at some future time, like these old-timers. Even though they were humble cars in their time, they're still loved and lovingly restored.
Hier auf der Hanwiese ist natürlich ein Riesenvolksfest.
This
Das heißt,
event
wir
is a
haben
big
einen
festival
Peilemarkt,
and an
man kann
exchange
fertige
parts market.
Fahrzeuge
You can buy
kaufen.
cars.
Und neben den
Besides the
160
160 participating
Teilnehmerfahrzeugen
oldtimers,
sind
another
weitere etwa
800 to
800 bis
1,000
1000
oldtimer
Gastoldtimer
enthusiasts
hier,
are here from
also
the region
Oldtimer-Freaks
to show
aus der
off their
Region,
beauties.
die hier ihre Schätzchen präsentieren.
The German town of Mönchengladbach hosts an annual old-timers rally that gets some of Europe's best-loved classics out on the road and into the sunshine. After a century of motoring, almost everyone at some stage will have seen a gleaming old car that brings back happy childhood memories.